It's now my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker, and it's been mentioned, Dr. Wayne McIntosh is our speaker this year. Wayne has a commendably brief abstract overview here of his background, which I think is testament to his modesty. Wayne has over 27 years experience in open and distance online learning, and he's a proven international track record in free software and open educational resources. He's well versed in the theory, research and practice of open, distance and e-learning, with international leadership experience in a variety of roles right across the tertiary education centre. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Wayne McIntosh to give his keynote address for the 2017
Kia ora, good morning everyone. It's a great honour and privilege to be back on campus again since my last visit in 2012. It's a double honour because I'm very pleased, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, of the history that you gave of the themes of the different fora across the years, and it is quite compelling to see the importance that open education has played as a central theme at these fora. So what I'd like to do today is share a story with you. This is an international story of universities from around the world working together to widen access to more affordable education using open education resources. I'd like to do a little housekeeping right up front, and that is acknowledge all the images I've used in this presentation. I'm rather fond of using rich visual images in my presentations, so if you find that my content is not sufficiently compelling, I hope that you enjoy the images. As an open educator, of course, all the content I use is openly licensed, and of interest you'll see that the majority of my images are dedicated to the public domain, which means legally there's no legal obligation from my end to actually acknowledge those sources. But as an academic, I feel it is our ethical responsibility to always acknowledge our sources, and so this is why I do it. I'd also just like to point out that this presentation is running entirely on web-based technologies. It's an HTML-based presentation. I'm not using any slideshow software. What is also important, and I just want to mention this, is that I'm running the presentation locally. In other words, I'm not relying on an internet connection. And this particular presentation format uses an amazing piece of open source software called Reveal.js, which gives us, it's essentially a single page application which would give us the ability to make open content available in remote locations that do not have reliable or affordable internet connectivity. So I'm just mentioning that at the onset. Of course, I would like to acknowledge the pioneers from our region. And as you well know, the University of the South Pacific is an outstanding pioneer. I have a remote connection with USP. The late James Mirage, one of your former vice-chancellors, was in fact co-promoter on my PhD studies back in the 90s. And I remember many, many hours discussing with James the phenomenal innovation of the University of the South Pacific with the implementation of satellite-based technology, or satellite-based technology to deliver across the region. The use of technology-mediated education is in your DNA. I also want to acknowledge the University of the South Pacific is a founding anchor partner of the OerU International Innovation Partnership. And I also would like to commend the more recent efforts in your work in developing policies around open textbooks as well as open educational resources. You should stand proud. I'd also like to reflect on an interesting story. And it's a story that has a strong connection with USP. One of the very first prototype courses that we developed for the OerU was a course called International Relations in Asia and the Pacific. And one of the images that was used in this course, and you would be familiar with this, is a shard of Lapita Pottery from the Lapita seafaring nations, which we know, carbon dated, was back to 3,000 years ago. And there are not many images of Lapita pottery around. And we managed to source this image from a leading publicly funded research institution in New Zealand. And of course it was licensed under all rights reserved. And I requested permission from the leading public research university to use the image in this open education course. The response I received from the university was an order form to send them $150 for a single license. I wrote back, I said, you don't understand. This is an open education course. Could I at least have permission from one of our photographers from our community to come and take a photo of that image? Of course, I didn't receive any response. But this is quite interesting. It's the appropriation of the public domain. That artifact was never under copyright. The Statute of Anne, which is the origins of copyright, was only enacted in 1709. This is clearly something that should be in the public domain. But of course, with the photographer taking the image, the copyright vests with the photographer. Needless to say, I sent out a message on the OerU list. Does anyone by any chance have an image of Lapita pottery that we could use under an open license? And as it turns out, your former DVC research, Professor Patrick Nunn, led one of the most significant finds of Lapita pottery. And Patrick, under the provisions of what we call academic exception, as the researcher on the project, gave us permission under an open license to use those images. So the images that are available under an open license on the internet, if you go and do a search, originate here at USP. So this is the point, in a slightly lighter vein, where I usually issue my public health warning. And that is, if you do suffer from hypertension, it's best to listen to me under parental guidance. The reason for this is I am a free and open source software user, and if during the course of this presentation you do not hear me mention your favorite piece of proprietary software, relax, take a deep breath, you'll be just fine. You see, the deal is, if you come to me after this presentation and say, Wayne, that is a cool piece of software that you are using, can I get a copy? I do not want to be faced with the ethical dilemma of refusing to help a friend in order to uphold the copyright provisions of proprietary software. But this is also an issue of inclusion. No learner in the world should be forced to have to purchase a proprietary software license in order to participate in learning, nor should they be required to sacrifice their freedoms of choice. So with that done, I'd like to reflect just briefly on some of the challenges that are facing higher education on the international stage. And what I'd like to do is have a look at it from both the supply and the demand side of the equation. Many of you will be familiar with the management icon and guru's predictions that 30 years from now, the big university campuses will be relics. Now, we're 20 years into the prediction, we've got 10 to go. And from my perspective, I actually do not buy into the rhetoric of the demise of the university. On the contrary, I believe that the university is going to survive deep into the future. We are one of only a handful of institutions that survived the Industrial Revolution. And I believe that we are going to survive the knowledge revolution. But be that as it may, what Drucker was referring to is a challenging problem. We are working in an industry that in most parts of the developing world, the cost of tuition fees for the last decade have increased beyond the rate of inflation. No industry will be able to survive in the long term with those conditions around us. And so in 2015, we saw the news breaking that within 2 years' time, Athabasca University, a leading open distance learning provider in Canada, will be insolvent. Under the third-party independent review, the Coates Review, it was again reiterated that unless significant changes were made or are made, Athabasca University will face a financial crisis in 2018. But what they are suggesting is that the institution rebrand itself with a strong focus on digital online learning. Let me cross the Atlantic to one of our other partners, the British Open University, icon of the team development approach in open distance learning. Earlier this year, the British Open University announced cuts to a budget of £100 million. Now, to put that in context, that is 25% of the university's budget. Again, the purpose of this is to reinvest in digital transformation. If we look at the other side, what is the private sector doing? And I just selected this example, which I think is one of the most innovative examples that are coming out of the private sector. It's a Silicon Valley startup. We're not sure where it's going to end up. But Mission U's model is to provide a free year of education at no cost to the learners. That's a very smart model. If the learners succeed in securing a job of $50,000 or more, they just need to contribute 15% of their gross salary for 3 years. It's a very interesting model. This is another very interesting initiative which comes from a philanthropic organization, Modern States. What Modern States are doing is they are assembling a massive open online courses targeting what is in the US known as the college level exam preparation program, CLEP exams. They are automated exams. They cost about $70 an exam, which would give credit transfer across the majority of North American universities. So it is another initiative that is focusing on this free year of study in our international market. Moving across to the demand side of the equation, we know that conservatively estimated from colleagues at both UNESCO and the Commonwealth of Learning that we need to provide for an additional 100 million places for learners who are qualified for a seat in tertiary education who will not have the privilege of a tertiary education. And you can do the mental math. That's the equivalent of building a university roughly the size of the University of the South Pacific every week for the next 20 years. The challenge is the majority of these learners will not have the fiscal resources to afford the traditional university model. But what if institutions got together and assembled only 2 courses based entirely on open educational resources, which would give access to learners to high-quality learning materials at no cost? And what if these institutions agreed to provide assessment services on cost recovery, fee for service, for formal academic credit? This is what we are doing with the OerU. At the onset, I must emphasize and reiterate that the OerU is a charitable initiative. We call it smart philanthropy because the lessons that we are learning by assembling open online courses in this modality can be plowed back into the mainstream operations of our organizations. We are building a parallel learning universe. And by building this parallel learning universe, we are able to generate sustainable revenue streams to support our initiatives in widening access to more affordable education. The concept is a simple but a powerful one. We assemble courses based entirely on OER, which means we can provide these courses to the learners at no cost. Through the smart use of technology, we can provide some limited levels of student support through automation. And of course, our partner institutions are in a position to provide assessment services that lead to formal academic credit towards credible qualifications. And at this point, I'd just like to play a very short video clip which illustrates the OerU concept from the learner's perspective. And technology willing, we should be fine.
OerU provides world-class education to everyone, no matter where they live or their background. OerU provides free online courses and affordable ways to gain academic credits towards qualifications from recognised institutions. Are you new to higher education or just interested in learning more about a topic? Study online for free from anywhere in the world. Choose from a range of high-quality complete courses and only pay for assessment if and when you're ready for it. OerU courses are designed with you in mind, with flexible ways to study. All our courses are taught online for web and mobile delivery. Content is based on free open source resources, which means you won't need to buy textbooks. Subjects are designed for independent study, and you get peer support from the OerU learning community. Find an OerU course that interests you. Get open access to online resources with no obligation or course fees. Study independently or learn with your peers. Only pay an assessment fee if you're ready for it. Submit your assignments for the opportunity to gain credits from the OerU partner organisation. If you're working towards a formal qualification, then OerU courses can help you get there. Visit oeru.org today.
So we now need to move on to the more challenging questions around the business of open, because how are we sustaining these operations if we're just giving courses away for free? And these are key questions that we need to contemplate and think about in order to build sustainable futures in higher education. There are two significant cost levers when we're talking about OER, or two significant foundations when you're thinking about the design of open business models. The first is the fact that the marginal cost of replicating digital knowledge is near zero. The implication of that is any institution that is attempting to build a business model from content is not likely to succeed long into the future. We cannot generate sustainable business models from digital content by creating artificial scarcity. It's a fundamental driver. The second very interesting phenomenon is, of course, that if we work and collaborate together in assembling the course materials we need, it's cheaper than doing it alone. With those concepts in mind, I'd just like to give a high-level perspective of what the OerU model in actual fact is. If you think of a traditional university package, all the services that are associated with a traditional university package are embedded as a single are embedded together as a package, and the learner pays their tuition fee for the full package. The OerU model is a model that uses open educational resources as a disaggregated service provision model. So basically, the content services and the interaction services we provide our learners at no cost. How is that funded? We fund that through our membership fees of our partner organizations. We're an extremely efficient organization, given the fact that we're entirely based on open source software. Our support services and technology services, which are shared through the membership fees, are also offered to the learner at no cost, but we share the cost across our institutions. The assessment services and the credentialing services are offered to learners on a fee-for-service basis, which enables us to provide learning opportunities at greatly reduced prices to learners without government subsidy. We have also spent considerable time thinking about open business models. We held two regional consultations, one in Oceania and one in North America, where the partners came together under the guidance of Creative Commons International, who have done a lot of work in open business models, to start thinking about what an open business model looks like for the benefit of our partner institutions. So just a couple of highlights in terms of our value propositions. The OerU is a low-cost initiative. It's low risk because our individual institutions are only exposed to 2 courses, right? It is a high-impact innovation because working collaboratively together, we can amass sufficient course materials that lead to exit credentials. The OerU is aligned with the community service goals of all our publicly funded institutions. We all have a commitment to public service. From the business model perspective, the customers that we are aiming to serve are not so much the learners that are currently within the system, it's the unreachable learners who are not served by the traditional higher education system. From the revenue perspective, no new money is required from our partner institutions, but our partner institutions who choose to generate new revenue will be able to generate improved revenue streams. So we have prepared an open business model, of course, under an open license. I appreciate you won't be able to read the detail of the text. I just want to show you what a business model canvas looks like. The columns on the left are more the input factors. The columns on the right are the outputs within the business model thinking. This business model is available online. I've shared the presentation. You can download it. And being openly licensed, you can go and pick out the aspects of that business model that work for your own context. And that's the purpose of a business model like this. But I'd just like to focus on 2 components of that business model: the customer segments we are aiming to serve, and of course then the revenue streams. And as I mentioned, we are aiming to better serve the underserved markets, those markets which we are currently not serving well. The try before you buy learners, those learners who are not sure if higher education is for them, to give them an opportunity to trial higher education. And if they feel that they are likely to succeed, they can then take assessment and potentially convert to full-time students at our institutions. Of course, marginalized populations in many countries around the world, it is a huge challenge for indigenous populations attempting first in family, tackling university studies for the first time. The OerU model gives the ability for learners to fail anonymously, to have more time to succeed, and then to think about converting into higher education. There's a huge market around professional development, in particular the whole area of micro-credentialing, adult independent learners who want to study for formal academic credit that we don't necessarily traditionally serve well, like refugees and migrants, socio-economic disadvantaged learners who wouldn't have had the money to afford to study at your institutions anyway. There is, of course, also a large segment of informal learners who just want to study out of self-interest. And these informal learners are particularly important for peer support in these open models that we use, because we do not provide tutorial support because we can't afford it. A little around the revenue and the cost side of the model. As I indicated, the model is designed to be a cost recovery model, which means any of the services around assessment, our partner institutions charge fees to cover the costs of grading and the administration of those assignments. And as an open collaboration, we have no objections to honoring the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights around the rights and ability to earn a living. And what I mean by that, we have no objections to universities in incorporating profit margins in building these systems. Of course, there are a number of opportunities around value-added fee-for-service opportunities. For example, introducing micro-credentialing models, and we do have an example in the network that is doing this on a fee-for-service basis. And some partners, although not implemented yet, are thinking about the notion of pay-as-you-go tutorial services. So, for example, if I as a learner am struggling with a particular concept within the OerU context, I could actually pay one of our partner institutions for an hour's worth of tutorial support or whatever. So, I mean, these are different opportunities that different institutions can think about in terms of moving to the future. I just want to point out that the OerU collaborators are shifting the question from how do we achieve sustainable OER projects to how will institutions remain sustainable without OER. A little bit about this concept that is emerging in the discussion forums in the field, open pedagogy. It's a little contested at the moment, but there is an interesting aspect of this notion of open pedagogy, which is what can open do, or what does open enable that closed can't do? And what are the implications for teaching and learning if we start thinking along those lines? I mean, an obvious example is for learners who can't afford textbooks, right? One thing that the open textbooks provide is the ability for learners to have the textbooks from the first day they start their studies. And that obviously has got to be good for learning, because you have access to the learning materials. The chances that you're going to perform better are greater, right? We also know from research that a large percentage of learners do not purchase textbooks for at least a number of their courses because they are simply too expensive. But there are other aspects of this open pedagogy that are worth thinking about. Now, I concede this is semi-free range learning, because of those of you that are quite observant, you would see a little fence at the back there, right? But we need to operate and think within the constraints of university level education. So the notion of free range learning is this idea that given that there are this wealth of resources that are openly accessible on the internet, what if we design our learning in ways where learners source their own learning materials and open access resources that are available on the open web in pursuit of the learning outcomes for the course, but also in pursuit of their own learning interests? And in fact, one of our very first prototype courses that we designed, International Relations in Asia and the Pacific, did adopt an open pedagogy approach under the free-range learning model. It's what Professor Jim Taylor calls the pedagogy of discovery. Now, if you think about it, the Pacific region, if defined as any country that touches the Pacific Ocean, right, is in excess of 40 plus different countries. It would be near impossible to develop a single textbook that covered every, well, let me put it this way, an affordable proprietary textbook that covered every region in the Pacific. But what we did in this course is we designed the course in a way to allow learners to pursue their own interests. In other words, they could focus on the countries or islands of the Pacific region of their particular interest and source open access materials freely available on the open web in pursuit of their learning objectives. And the course was designed in a way to help them support their learning. So an interesting example of something that open can do that closed can't do. The other interesting question is, given open education resources and the current state of technology. Now, what I mean by open education resources are resources that are not constrained by copyright, resources that you are free to reuse, adapt, and modify. How would you build the learning systems of tomorrow? If we think under the traditional closed model, the big way of doing this was the whole interoperability standards, because you must remember the interoperability standards were also informed by the commercial publishers sitting around the table who were designing those standards. Because under closed copyright, you have to have, well, very complicated ways of getting content into your learning management system if you want to reuse it. But under open, We don't need interoperability standards. We already have them. They're called HTML. Now, given that we are thinking about learning on the web, how would you design your systems differently? And this is something we've been doing at the OerU, is thinking about how do we design systems for learning on the internet as opposed to learning on a single application, right? And this is how we do it. All our planning work, all our meetings, all our consultations are done openly and transparently in the wiki. Any organization that wants to contribute to our planning is free to do so. In fact, during our input evaluation survey, the one item that ranked the highest of all the items in the survey to find out what we were doing well was this fact around open planning. It builds trust. You see, the OerU is not here to put our partner institutions out of business. It's not in our interests to undermine the fiscal viability of our partner institutions because we rely on them for funding. Our model is to find ways of working with our partner institutions so that you can achieve your strategic objectives through the use of open education resources, so that you can pick and choose those aspects of the model that work well for your context. Our design and development model is also conducted openly and transparently, which means anybody in the world can actually engage in our open design and development process. And of course, all our materials are delivered entirely based on open source software. This is what our system looks like. We author all our materials in the wiki. And the reason we do that is, or the two primary reasons for doing that. It's a technology that supports open collaboration so that we can have educators in different parts of the world and designers in different parts of the world working together on the same pages that are incorporated in the course materials. Version control is critically important. We wouldn't be able to collaborate in a learning management system because if you gave me editing access to your Moodle and I came in and I made a change to one of your pages as my contribution to helping move this process forward, you wouldn't know that I made that change. And so this is why version control is so important. And that's why we edit in a wiki. Now, a wiki is the worst environment to publish learning materials for learners, because your learners will get lost, they won't know where they're going. So what we do is we assemble a simple content outline in the wiki of the pages that would be included in the course materials. We have an automated open source script that you just simply press a button to request a snapshot. And what the technology will do is publish an open course, an open website using a WordPress installation. As you will know, a large majority of websites are hosted using the WordPress open source infrastructure. And if we have time after the question and answer, I can actually show you a live course so that you can see what this looks like. But this is our model from the authoring and publishing side. Looking at the model from the learning perspective, we have, of course, the course website there at the top, which learners access. Now, at the OerU, learners must be able to access all the course materials without the need to register a password. In our view, if you are required to register a password in order to access the materials, by definition, those materials are closed, right? What we then do is this is a learning system that's designed for learners to learn on the internet. We adopt the best of breed open source software technologies to support interactions across the web that are totally independent from the content side. So, for example, we use the Discourse engine, which is a modern forum engine that has some rather impressive features built into the system that are designed to facilitate peer learning support. For example, the ability where learners who engage more with the platforms and become more trusted users, more features of the software are made available to them to assist and help and with the peer-to-peer learning system. We use a piece of software, the STAR, which is a social social bookmarking software. It's a piece of software called Semantic Scuttle, where learners can share links that they find valuable across the internet. We use other technologies like Mastodon, which is a open source alternative to Twitter for microblogging posts and having a social network. We use another piece of open source software called Hypothesis. This is a piece of software that enables learners to annotate any web page they find on the internet and have discussions on those annotations that they find on the internet. We then use smart technologies to harvest these interactions of all the learners in our courses into a single timeline that people can see the interactions that are taking place across the web associated with any particular course. Now, as an open organization, it's entirely open source. We publish the recipes, the technical recipes for any organization to replicate any of these technologies they may find useful for their own purposes. Our OerU partners, we provide free hosting services of this technology infrastructure stack in terms of learning together. We're at the point where we have assembled a full first year of study. We are focusing on 2 exit qualifications. The first is the Certificate of Higher Education in Business that will be conferred by the University of the Highlands and Islands. And you'll see from our course list, there are the range of the typical courses you would expect to find in a first year of business. The second credential that we are working towards during our launch of our first year of study is a Certificate of General Studies in Arts. And there are the list of courses that have been completed and available for the launch of the first year of study. And of course, being a Certificate of General Studies, the majority of the business courses would qualify for this exit award. I appreciate that this is an award which may not be very attractive from a vocational education perspective, but you think back to our target audience where mature adults are trying to assemble their first degree. This is, in fact, a very attractive award. What I should point out is how our credit transfer and course articulation system works. We are founded on a number of core principles. OerU partner institutions retain total decision-making autonomy over all aspects of assessment and credit recognition within their model. The model is designed to operate within existing institutional policy, and we respect the residency requirements of our respective institutions. The OerU network has already collaboratively developed a set of credit transfer and credit accumulation guidelines which have been approved unanimously through the network, and we have in fact drafted the credit transfer contracts that we use to facilitate this process of credit transfer within the network. A little about micro courses. As you well know, working internationally, the sizes of courses differ. In North America, for example, a standard university-level course is 120 notional learning hours, whereas in New Zealand it's 150 learning hours. In Australia it's 160. In the United Kingdom, a module, which is their equivalent of a course, is typically 200 notional learning hours. So we've had to find a way of how do you deal with these differences in an international credit transfer system, and the way that we've approached it at the OerU is to assemble all our courses as micro courses, roughly equating to 40 notional learning hours. And so we've created a system of transfer currency, if you will, so that 3 micro courses in North America equates to a full year course, whereas 4 micro courses in Australia and New Zealand equate to a full course, and 5 in the United Kingdom. But of course, with micro courses, this opens up the door for micro credentials. The OerU has partnered with EduBits, which is a New Zealand initiative focusing on micro credentials. In fact, the Minister of Tertiary Education has announced a pilot study in micro credentials in New Zealand, and this collaboration with EduBits is in fact one of the pilots that are being investigated. So how the system works. Introduction to Project Management comprises 4 micro courses. The role of project management, initiating a project, planning a project, executing and closing a project. If learners request assessment services and successfully achieve the digital certifications, the 4 digital certifications, they will qualify for transcript credit that will be recognized towards the Certificate of Higher Education Business at the University of the Highlands and Islands. So we have created pathways for micro-certifications that map to formal, traditional academic credit. So what I'd like to do, and in the traditions of open source, we typically put forward proposals which we very often call straw man or straw person proposals. These are just concept ideas that we put out there for you to have a think about, and we can have a conversation about them, about what could USP potentially do. There are 3 things that I think you could think about. One, of course, you could reuse any of the OerU courses and point students to those resources as additional resources to support your courses because they're available at no cost. What about assembling one course based entirely on OER in a niche area of the University of the South Pacific? What if you were to approve and adopt one OerU course that's already completed and teach it here locally to full fee paying students under a full service model? Because that introduces a very, very interesting use case scenario. So basically, this is the straw dog proposal. What do you think about assembling one course in a niche area for the OerU network? Something that is likely to be high demand, an area of competitive advantage that you have. I mean, I don't know your institution well enough, but what immediately comes to mind is something in the area of Pacific Studies. I mean, I do think you have niche expertise in that area. Of course, it would be relevant. It's not going to be quick to market because it's going to take time to get there. You will incur some course development cost, but the big advantage of this model is you are building local capacity in open design and development, which is different from the traditional design model. So that's one straw dog proposal. The other is, why not adopt Learning in a Digital Age? This is a course that is designed to support the digital and learning literacies that are required for learning success in tertiary education for the 21st century. Every learner in the world today that is embarking on tertiary education study would benefit from a program like this. I think this has a number of advantages. It will be a high demand course. It's highly relevant. It will be quick to market because the course materials are completed. You can adopt them tomorrow. You would not incur any course development cost. There's no fiscal risk because you don't have the course. The disadvantage, of course, is you won't be building internal capacity around OER development. So let me basically leave that there. I think the key benefits of contributing to the OerU in today's world is that sharing costs is an economic imperative for our institutions. By pooling resources, you will generate a significant boost in your own capacity. And participating in partnerships of like-minded institutions like the OerU network, you will be able to achieve innovations on scale that you would not be able to do working alone. So I thank you very much for your kind attention and look forward to having a conversation, and if time permits, I can actually demonstrate a course, but I mean, I think it's more important to have a conversation.
So one of the things we always want in a keynote is to challenge our thinking, to give us creative and innovative ideas. I'm sure you agree with me that Wayne's delivered that in huge these days, so thanks very much for a very, very interesting presentation, Wayne. We'll ask questions. If you could raise your hand and one of our technical people will come around with a microphone, and if you could just introduce yourself and then ask your question and let Wayne respond. Thank you.
I should just also possibly add, I can speak quite candidly, working for a charitable organization, I have no business secrets to hide. So I can speak openly and candidly. I'm not selling you anything, I'm trying to give you something.
Thanks, Wayne. My name's Ian Thompson. I'm an e-learning fellow here in the Faculty of Arts, Law and Education. It's a bit of a technical question, but if there is no requirement for students to log on and identify themselves, how do you do the analytics? How do you track what they're doing? Because you can't identify them.
It's a very important question. So there are two levels to this. One is if a learner wanted to contribute to a discussion forum, they would need to register, but it's not a requirement, it's optional, okay? And the reason we do that is we would love to keep it open, but spam management in today's world is just not possible under these open systems. So that at least does provide some level, albeit it's not that sophisticated, because we will still have a large number of learners who choose not to register, formally register. From the pilot courses, but we of course keep web analytics of the website visits. We can track how many learners who haven't registered accounts are actually engaging on the different pages. We've had some interesting results running some prototypes. One of the courses we ran was a course we ran with the University of Canterbury a number of years ago. It was a postgraduate course under what we call an open boundary format. And what the open boundary format is where you have a course that you're teaching to full fee, full-time registered students who are getting full tutorial support, learning in parallel with the free learners in this open environment. So it's a very, very powerful model for certain applications. What we found interesting, and I'm not suggesting that the data, we don't have sufficient data to generalize beyond this particular prototype. But what we did find is that the free learners engaging in this process, we didn't see the attrition that you normally see with the commercial MOOCs. Now the hypothesis is, and further research is needed, I'm not suggesting that we can generalize beyond this at this point in time, but the hypothesis is that learners engaging, or free learners engaging in a learning environment with learners studying for formal academic credit, that the quality of the discourse is such that it keeps the others interested. But we'll need to wait and see in terms of how that goes. But you're right, the level of, that's a compromise we have to make in order to sustain the values of openness, but a good question, thanks. Yeah.
Gillian Brodie from School of Biological and Chemical Sciences. Thank you, Dr. McIntosh, for a very, very interesting presentation. I just had a question about your free-range learning and semi-free-range learning, and maybe the semi bit is the bit that I am asking about. Often the students, when they're using the internet, and not overly discerning about where they're getting their information from. Can you comment on that aspect?
Absolutely, and what you're referring to is in fact the semi-free range learning. Because one of the things that's critically important is we have to build capacity and skills among our learners to discern credible and reliable information, right? Because not all information, of course, we find on the internet is credible or reliable for academic study purposes. And in fact, this is one of the skills that the Learning in a Digital Age course is designed to help build capacity in learners using the research work that we have and know about in terms of discerning high quality resources in support of learning. So that's kind of the semi-component around that. And I must also concede that it wouldn't be possible in all discipline areas, just given the nature of disciplines. But where it is possible, and where we do have a wide range of open resources, I think it's better to equip our learners to learn on the internet in preparation for their future careers in a world that is perhaps a little different from when I was at uni. Yeah.
Thank you.
I am again Surendra Prasad from School of Biological and Chemical Sciences. We have developed many of our courses online, especially the chemistry courses. Almost we are about to make it 100% except 2 courses. We are certainly facing some difficulty in offering our practical laboratory classes, because is there any possibility and that we can have the only virtual lab and that will be accepted through online?
A very good question. I know that there are some institutions working in the open distance learning space that have successfully implemented virtual laboratories for certain components of work. I mean, I'm not a chemist, so I wouldn't be able to respond to all dimensions. I mean, I suspect that there would be areas in chemistry that virtual labs wouldn't be appropriate, just given the nature of the tactile skills that you need to develop in dealing with test tubes and that sort of thing, which I think would be hard to replicate in a virtual lab environment. I mean, I think the big challenge for us in the open education space is the number of those virtual lab tools that would be available as open source. To be honest, I haven't searched to know the answer to that question. But there are projects, I'm sure you've come across them, the PhET simulations, P-H-E-T, have done a number of simulations in chemistry and the natural sciences that are extremely powerful in communicating challenging concepts in the natural sciences. The other comment I would add, and USP I'm sure is well versed in this, is how the open distance learning institutions have implemented effective solutions for practical lab experiences. For example, using the facilities of other universities during the vacations for learners to come and do the practical labs. I mean, it's a challenge which the open distance learning community has served well. I mean, you would also be familiar with the British Open University's virtual lab kits, where the kits have been assembled and sent out to the learners for them to conduct their experiments. I mean, I think, as with all challenges in life, the open model, I think, is more effective in solving those challenges, because if we come together and think about solutions for these problems, we are likely to achieve a better outcome and a better result. So what I can do is, if you're interested, I can show you what an OerU course looks like in terms of the live technology, and then we can have, possibly have some questions around that, because it's not a learning management system. As I pointed out, we are not attempting to rid the world of the shackles of learning management systems. We are just trying to think creatively about how do we build an ecosystem to support learning on the internet for the future. So let me get out here. So that is basically what an OerU course looks like, right? It's a standard website. It is, it's been designed, responsive design. Okay. And basically how our courses are assembled, each of our micro courses are assembled from a number of learning pathways. And the reason we called our units of learning pathways was to avoid the confusion in nomenclature that you find between different institutions, what different institutions call their learning units, right? Because some people talk about lectures, other people talk about sections, units, spaceships, modules, and different terminologies used. So the network got together and said, well, let's try and find a term that doesn't conflict with the concepts that are used locally because it facilitates reuse across our network. And so the learning pathways, and there are 4 learning pathways for this micro course. Sustainability is entirely possible, understanding systems, you get the idea, right? And we can go into an individual learning pathway. And the learning pathway is made up from a sequence of subpages. In this particular case, the overview is provided. There's a video stimulus, a signpost to help learners along. The learning content and interactions are embedded in individual pages. For those that want to, I'm not logged in at the moment. Remember, if I want to make a contribution through the communications, I log in to avoid spam. So this is going to be an interesting challenge. Do I remember the password? Cross your fingers. Oh, I made it. So basically, one of the commenting engines we've got, this is a piece of open source software. It's a micro commenting engine, which we call, Wiki Educator Notes. So, the idea is the learners are prompted, to reflect and share. This is just a stream of digital consciousness. If they post a WeNote, it should go through. And with luck, you should never do this in a live presentation. Right, so you get the idea now. This is the live course feed. Okay, so the comment I've just posted is now in the live feed. But what this feed does, it aggregates all the posts from the different technologies we're harvesting that are distributed on the web. Remember the discourse engine, hypothesis. We don't use an e-portfolio system. We encourage our learners to maintain their own personal blogs on the internet, which they can publish at no cost. And the big advantage of that is that the learners retain control over all the content that they produce, right? And it means after they completed the course, they've still got access to the content that they contributed to the system. So we also aggregate blog posts. So if you look here, you will see there's a reference there from where the content comes from. So in this particular example, that's a post from the discourse course discussion engine, right? Oh no, correction. That's a contribution from this WeNotes post that's on the site, okay? You'll see my contribution came from course. If we scan down here, let's just see. Find another example here. So here's a post that's come from a different source, right? The forum engine. So that's not in this system. It's on a totally independent website that we're able to harvest and bring into the system. Let me find another example. Let me see if I can find a blog post that the learner posted. Can you see any blogs here as I'm scaling? Yeah, here's one. See here? So this is an interaction that Claire Good posted on her personal blog. So if I click through, I should end up on her own personal blog site, right? So yeah, you'll see. So this is Claire's own blog site. So you get the idea. We have the ability of harvesting interactions from different distributed technologies on the website that use the course tag and that we are actually harvesting. And as I said, this is all open source. We publish the recipes and share them with all our partners. If you wanted to replicate any of this technology locally for your own students here on campus, you would be able to do that because it's entirely based on open source technology. Our partner institutions, OerU courses, of course, we host them. That's part of the membership fees that contribute to hosting all this infrastructure. So that's basically what an OerU course looks like. And if there are any additional questions around some of the technology aspects or how this may support or constrain your own pedagogies, I'd be happy to have the conversation. And so this is essentially a WordPress site. I mean, what I could do is, out of interest, if you wanted to see, I could go to any course page here. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see a link to the content. Okay? So if you just have a look at the page, there it is. If I link through to the content page, the source material are in the wiki. So this is where we work collaboratively in this collaborative editing space, right? I wonder how much collaboration, or sadly on this I just chose a bad example, but every page in the wiki has a detailed revision history. So if there were 50 edits on this particular page, we would have version control and know what those edits are. I can show you how a course is produced. If you look at the headings of the navigation here, it has a startup, it's got a course guide, it's got interactions, it has an assignment, it's got the learning pathways, then the individual learning pathways. If I go to the wiki, let me open that there. This is the outline page that we use to generate the course navigation and the course site from a collection of individual pages. You'll see that the headings there, it's just a structured bullet list, right? They're the main headings of the top tier navigation, startup, course guide, which includes those pages, the interactions, course announcements, the learning pathways. That was the first page of the learning pathway, right? Then the sub-pages of those learning pathways. So it's just a collection of individual pages that are in the wiki. And when a partner wants to publish a course site, all they do is they click on the course site button, they put in the user credentials which we give you, and then a script will run in the back end automatically and publish that course site. And as I said, this technology is entirely open source. What the script then does, it applies a custom theme. Because this is open source, you would be able to develop a theme which matches your own visual identity, right? The script automatically handles all the navigation and all the aspects for making the course website work. So that's how our system works.
Thank you, Dr. McIntosh. I think that gave me the perfect opportunity to expand my previous question. So the content of the course that you've got up there is actually quite similar to what I teach. So I thank you for that. So my question is, if your course is incredibly successful and you've got 20,000 people logged in or on the live feed, and the blogs are going up, and you have someone who's bringing in things like Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and you actually think that those content is absolute rubbish, so you've got 15,000 people putting up what you think is rubbish, what do you do, and who monitors that many people on the live feed like that?
It's an excellent question. If anyone posts rubbish, you are free to contribute and alert them to the quality of the content, as is any educator. But I accept that there is a risk. One of the ways we think about peer learning, or one of the realities of peer learning, imagine a class of 1,000 learners, right? What is the likelihood of 3 learners knowing the right answer? And if that likelihood is there, there's the potential for a learner to contribute and point out, well, here's a challenge with the content. But I accept, if there's nobody monitoring, yeah, that is a risk that can happen. It's the internet. It's open. And it's a big challenge for us. We don't have the resources to provide tutorial support. We just don't. And our view and perspective of this, it's perhaps better to provide access to high quality learning experiences, right? Knowing that there is a risk of, the fact that we don't have active tutorial support is better than not having access at all. So it's a challenge that we're going to have to face as we move forward. one of the concepts that the OerU has been working with is this idea of Academic Volunteers International. And what this is the concept of, well, as an open community, could we build a community of volunteers, academic volunteers around the globe who could help us with some of these challenges? They could be retired academics. Another example might be we're very keen to introduce an OerU course in community service learning, where the requirements of the course would be to provide community service and learning support on our learning platforms in recognition for formal academic credit. I mean, North America, there are a couple of courses that use community source learning. And that is another way in which we could potentially improve the tutorial support. But you're absolutely right. There is a risk of a learner posting rubbish, and it might remain undetected. And the counter side of that, of course, is that's why learners can pay full tuition fees to come to USP, right? Because that won't happen here. Yeah.
Hey folks, thanks. We might wrap up this session here now. So just again, I'd like to thank Wayne for a really very interesting talk. And the presentation, I think, to my mind, answered a lot of the questions that I had coming into this. That Wayne and I corresponded a bit before he came over, and he was sort of telling me to be patient and wait and listen to the talk, and it'll all be explained to the talk, and it certainly was. So that's, I think, have been really, really helpful. I think it provides USP with a challenge. We are part of this group. I think we haven't contributed in the way that we wish we had. And I think this talk has been very helpful in establishing clarity about how we might contribute. And I think Wayne's talk not only explaining the OerU clearly, but also showing how USB can contribute if it wants to in this way. And we have been doing some work in this space. Prof. Somnaidu from CFL started a lot of work on the OER. In fact, there's been workshops running this week. So it's certainly an area of interest, and the VC in his talk pointed out that some time ago we started a conversation about this, and we're hoping that Wayne's talk and presence here in Suva will help us to regain some momentum on this area and move in an area I think is critical for the future of the university, and as Wayne mentioned, a philanthropic contribution to the Pacific, where we all know there's a relatively low participation rate in higher education. So his talk and his topic is particularly timely for where the university sees itself at the moment. So on behalf of the university and Vice Chancellor, I'd just like to thank Wayne very much for a very, very interesting talk, and we'll now be able to have a break for tea. And Wayne, I'm sure, is happy to interact and chat with people over tea and during the rest of the day as well. So thanks again.